Okay, so one of the ramifications and consequences, and this is consequentialism, so we have to take consequences into consideration. And again, it's unclear for utilitarianism how far down the road, how far into the future we need to consider consequences. How far into the future are we ethically on the hook for the decisions we make right now? Mill says the best we can do, because this is a best guess about the future, and he's somewhat optimistic here as well, the best we can do is focus on those who are most immediately impacted by the decision, and then hope things turn out okay in the end. And if we're talking about overall happiness in the future, I'm not sure how satisfying that particular response, that particular answer is. I mean, I believe this story is correct. I believe it to be the case. Jeffrey Dahmer was drowning as a child. Someone saved him. Jeffrey Dahmer then ended up, eating people. The person who saved them is a little bit kind of responsible for all these people who were eaten. Because had he not saved him from drowning as a child, these people would not have been eaten by him. Now, again, there was no way for him to know that when he saved this child. Just like the hospital, there's no way for the hospital to ensure it's a best guess about the future. A best guess. And so there's a clip from The Good Place that I'll email out to you that talks about these unintended consequences and how far down the road are you ethically on the hook. And The Good Place, if you're not familiar, where have you been? If you are familiar, you know that it goes based on a point system, which is basically utilitarianism, right? Does your action lead to more benefit than it does the opposite of benefit, whatever the opposite of benefit is? I can't think of right now, right? And so if it does, then you get points, right? You gain points and lose points. That's utilitarianism, man. That's utilitarianism. Okay. So one of the consequences of this two different levels really of pleasure, physical pleasure, mental pleasure, is that some people end up being more valuable than other people. That their number in the equation should count more than other folks. In part because they're pursuing mental pleasures instead of physical pleasures. Again, those social cleansers I talked about, they're eliminating the physical pleasurable folks. It's why the fat man is obviously the most ethical of all of the decisions. The very, 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 very fat man is clearly pursuing physical pleasures. He's quite frankly then not as valuable in the equation as everyone else. So part of it has to do with this mental pleasure, physical pleasure distinction. Part of it also has to do with impact on the community. How much more happiness are you bringing to the society? Which means some people are more valuable than other people. And I sort of implicitly got to this when I was talking about the 18-year-old who's in a gang versus the 80-year-old who may donate tons of money to the wing of the hospital. Potential counts, future counts, but so does impact on the community, impact on the society. Who's going to ultimately bring about a greater amount of happiness? So, if your mother is a school teacher, let's go back to the Traldi example, the school teacher, and she's a great school teacher, impacting 30 children every year for the better. The 5-track workmen are busy busting their you-know-whats, who knows how many hours, laying track, probably don't have a whole lot of time for civic engagement and civic involvement. They're probably not tutoring people after school because they just don't have time because they're so tired after having worked so hard. Maybe they have a family, maybe they don't. Their impact in the community for each individual is not going to be as great as the school teachers. That's why I say on the surface, 5 is greater than 1. But as we dig deeper and start talking about actual greater amount of happiness, actual consequences, actual results, sometimes that one may outweigh the five, depending on who that one is and who these five are. Mother Teresa was more valuable than Hitler. We don't have to have access necessarily to particular numbers and happiness numbers and all of that stuff. Remember, this isn't an answer. We're not trying to get to a particular number. We're just weighing. We're comparing and contrasting greater thans and less thans. Better to keep Mother Teresa alive. Better to not keep Adolf Hitler alive. And so I talked about the cop shows last time with the social cleansers. The medical dramas all have this, as far as I know, all have an example like this too, have an episode like this. Well, this is an awful person here on the table. How hard should we really work to keep them alive? Forget about the organ donor thing, which I mentioned last time. How hard should we work to keep this person alive? Because they're bringing about a greater amount of unhappiness in the world. The world would be a happier place if they didn't survive. Sacrifice this one for the sake of the many. Sacrificing one for the good of the many. The greater good, more utilitarian language. Focusing on the greater good. You're talking about greater good, we're always talking about majorities, again, democracy. One of the problems with that is the minority then never gets heard. They never have equal voice. Because they're always the minority rather than the majority. Greater happiness for greater number of folks, the minority just don't have the numbers. These medical dramas, we're willing to sacrifice this one for the sake of the many. The greater good. Something along those lines. One of their potential criticisms of something like utilitarianism, like any reason-based ethics, is do I have the time to actually do it? Do I have the time to do it? And Mill says, yeah, you have plenty of time. You know why you have plenty of time? Because we have the whole history of humanity. But that only gives us tendencies. If we rely upon the history of humanity, then we never make moral progress. At some point, somebody has to stop and check the math again, or we continue to do what we've always done, and no progress is made with regards to morality. And Mill is very clear that we do progress with regards to morality. How do we do so? Because somebody stops and checks the math. We realize, oh wait, our math has been off all of this time. He says, because he specifically replies or attempts to reply to this particular objection. Defenders of utility often find themselves called upon to reply to such objections as this. There's not time previous to action for calculating and weighing the effects of any line of conduct on general happiness. The answer is that there has been ample time, the whole past duration of the human species. During all that time, mankind have been learning by experience the tendencies of actions, on which experience, all the prudence as well as all the morality of life are dependent. The corollaries from the principle of utility, like the precepts of every practical art, admit an indefinite improvement, and in a progressive state of the human mind, their improvement's perpetually going on. Wait, we only improve if we're checking the math. Which then means we're stuck with the no time problem again. You gotta have time to stop and do the math. Tendencies can only get you so far. Again, usually better to tell the truth. Usually better to keep people alive if you're a doctor. But sometimes, maybe not so much. Not so much. So this is why on page 116 and 117 of the Berner and Rayleigh, act utilitarianism treats all individuals impartially, counting every individual exactly the same. But I'm not sure it does. I think this is false. Some people are more valuable than other people. Their numbers count more in the ethical equation because of pursuing higher pleasures rather than lower pleasures, and because they're bringing about a greater benefit, maximizing overall happiness in a way that others are not. So they're more valuable in this equation. Mill's very, very clear, though, here. What he doesn't want you to do is to overemphasize your own number in the equation. You can't save mom because she's your mom. You've got to save mom because of these other factors. Again, you're the director of the play, not the actor in the play. You don't get extra points because it's you. In some ways, you sort of have to objectify yourself, numerify yourself. You're a number. We're all numbers. Social Security numbers, student ID numbers, credit card numbers, number. So Sharapi's about keeping it real, even with his own family. And so, many moons ago now, when the American Girl doll store thing opened here in town, my oldest daughter was right about that age where that's kind of what she was into, with stuff like that. We didn't have any of those. Those things were far too expensive, but we would go and hang out and look around and so forth and browse. So we'd fill out the little things so that she could get the catalogs in the mail and whatnot. And so she'd be all excited, like, "Oh, Daddy, look, I got this coupon in the mail, or I got this, I got that, right? Addressed to me." It's like, "Yeah, baby, that's great and all. That's awesome, but I gotta be honest with you. American Girl store doesn't care about you. Even though your name is on it, they don't care about you. All they care about is that your potential money to be spent in the store. Your numbers, your potential dollars to them." So then we talk about return on investments and so on and so forth, and the cost of postage and the cost of the dolls and all that. Right? And we all know this. And yet, pointed marketing still works. When Amazon recommends stuff, sometimes the stuff you actually want. But Amazon ain't your friend. They don't care about you. They're trying to make money. They are a business. They're about the bottom line. Again, that's utilitarianism, the bottom line. But for utilitarianism, the bottom line happens to be overall happiness instead of dollar amounts. But this, again, is kind of a business way of looking at something like ethics. Everyone's not treated equally because not everyone counts equally, which may be a potential issue, that everyone then becomes merely a number rather than a person, right? So we're maximizing happiness here. That's a number. And so it may lead to some using of people, because we don't really see them as people, we see them as numbers. Everyone then becomes a recipient of my potentially ethical actions or potentially unethical actions. I'm benefiting the whole, greater good, so on and so forth. And it's interesting, and I would challenge you that, as you know, this week and so forth, as you're kind of thinking about utilitarianism, the stuff I've been talking about in these videos and the stuff you've been reading about, and we should kind of be a bit more attentive to the words and phrases that people use and see just how many of them are really couched in utilitarianism. The bottom line, that's utilitarianism. Greater good, utilitarianism, right? Some of these other phrases I've mentioned throughout, right? If it goes back to numbers with regards to people and ethics and so on and so forth, that's utilitarianism. And there are lots and lots of these phrases out there. Sharapi would contend that utilitarianism is probably the most prominent ethical theory out there. Yeah, probably the most prominent one. That doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just telling you it's probably the most prominent one, right? Okay, go on. This is an example that I'm taking from a Conversation Starter for Kids book. How important is happiness? Remember, that's the focus again for utilitarianism. In some regards, utilitarianism is hedonism. It's about happiness. And physical pleasure does count, just not as much as mental pleasure. And our pleasure then, because we're capable of the mental, is greater than the pleasure of cats and dogs and cows and chickens and so on and so forth. Right? Sharapi will think it's interesting. I'm planting a seed now for a discussion we'll have on down the road, right, with regards to the things that we eat and the things that we don't. It seems the things that most people eat, with regards to animals, are the things that seem the furthest away from the capacity for abstract thought, furthest away from possibly being like us in the mental realm, right? Not capable of mental pleasures. Perhaps. Okay. Here's an example. How important is happiness? Of course, happiness is very important, generally speaking, but is happiness all that matters when it comes to right and wrong? What about this case? Sarah's class is in big trouble. Someone has drawn a picture of the teacher on the blackboard. The picture shows the teacher with donkey's ears and a pig's tail. The teacher says she will give the whole class a week's detention if they don't tell her who did it. If they do tell her, she will give the naughty artist a week's detention, but no one else will suffer. Sarah didn't draw the picture. She was in the library with the teacher. Notice, remember, we're talking about more ethical, less ethical. The most ethical thing to do, the most ethical choice, is now off the table for Sarah. The most ethical choice would be for Sarah to say she did it, even if she didn't. She would suffer, everyone else would go free. A sacrifice that she should be willing to make. Okay, I'll get a week's detention, but everyone else can go free. That maximizes happiness. Everyone else gets to have fun. My displeasure more than outweighed by everybody else's happiness and pleasure. But that's not an option here. She was with the teacher. She can't claim to have done it. Shoot. So what's the next most ethical option? Randomly choose somebody else to blame. I mean, ideally, hopefully she'll get it right and actually is the guilty person. And they're getting their just desserts and all of that stuff, and only free people go free, blah, 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 blah. But even if someone innocent suffers, happiness is still maximized. Even if capital punishment gets it wrong, to go back to what I talked about last time with regards to Mill, even if capital punishment gets it wrong, which Mill says is so minute, such an outlier that they would get it wrong at all. It's a really interesting essay if you find the time to read it. That it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. But even if they did, kind of so what? It's unfortunate for that person, but again, we're not talking about individual people here necessarily. We're talking about maximizing happiness. So if Sarah chooses someone at random, they did it. That person suffers. Maybe they did it. Then all the innocent go free and they're all happy. But even if they didn't, even if they're innocent, sure, they may suffer a bit more because they're actually innocent. But happiness might be maximized even more because all the other innocent kids get to be free, and the guilty kid got away with it too. Maximizing happiness. Now, one of the open questions with regards to utilitarianism, and it depends on the utilitarian that you ask, is it greater to have everyone suffer a little bit, or does it maximize happiness more to have one person suffer greatly? Are we maximizing happiness if everyone gives up 2 days detention, everyone suffers a little bit? Or does it maximize happiness if one person, potentially an innocent person, gets punished for a week, but no one else gets punished at all? Notice elementary schools do this all the time, right? They're encouraging whistleblowing. They're encouraging snitching, right? They are teaching this as something which should be upheld, that everyone benefits. The whole is better off if you all just tell me the one person who did the wrong thing. They get punished, everyone else goes free, boom, we're done. In my kids' school, my kids' elementary school, this would be a daily complaint from my children when they would come home. We talk about recess, and they'd say, well, we didn't get it today. Why not? Because the lunchroom was too loud. Okay, so what did you do about it? Nothing, just stonewall to everybody else. Okay, time out. And again, I wasn't explaining to them whether this was ethically right or ethically wrong. I was merely explaining to them the thought process behind what the teachers were doing. The teachers are punishing everyone for something that only a few people are doing. In my kids' eyes, that's wrong. Only the guilty should be punished. As I explained to them, there are hundreds and hundreds of children and only 1 or 2 adults. The adult knows that they cannot catch every guilty person. So the idea is make the punishment great enough for everyone else that you'll turn in the guilty people. Look how long this was effective in Stalinist Russia. Neighbors turning in neighbors. The police didn't have a lot that they had to do. They didn't have to go catch people because the people policed themselves. So-and-so next door is doing such and such. And notice the benefit that has for me. Because now the government also thinks, well, you can trust so-and-so. He's one of us. Which means maybe I can get away with a few things under the table, blah, blah, blah. Because again, my happiness counts too. It's not the top priority, but it does count in the ethical calculus. The ethical thing to do may be for me to not report all of the money I make on my taxes, as long as I'm using that extra money to benefit people beyond just myself. Because what I've got to do is I've got to ensure that the way that I'm using the money is greater than the way that the government will be using the money for things like parks and stuff. Let's go back to the organ donor thing. Okay, if we're taking utilitarianism seriously here, obviously, when Shrapi kicks the bucket, he should be donating his organs. Because I'm gone, what am I going to use them for? No more benefit for me. Someone else should then receive the benefit. Here's the bigger question for utilitarianism. The older I get, the worse my organs get. Right? The more well-used they become. So perhaps then, I should die and donate my organs when I'm in optimal physical condition. For most men, it's usually around age 27, 28. Usually. Although things are changing, it's kind of getting slightly older now, closer to 30. But still, this has got extra miles on it. And extra poundage too. In order for that not to be maximizing happiness, my death, and then here's some organs for plenty of other people to live, because that's going to lead to a great amount of happiness, right? I have to ensure then that my continued existence would lead to a greater amount of happiness than that result would have. Which is to say, I need to be somewhat aware of, man, all these organs, that would have helped these many lives, and let's presume they're all good people who are connected and so forth. Wow, that's going to be a whole heck of a lot of happiness. Again, I don't need specific numbers, because it's just a compare and contrast. So man, I better really be doing something with the rest of this life of these organs to outweigh this. I better really be maximizing happiness. Otherwise, my continued existence and my continued mileage on these organs is actually unethical. Or at least less ethical than the alternative. And that's really what we're talking about here. Again, it's not ethical or unethical, it's more ethical, less ethical. And so notice, once you numerize yourself, that may get you thinking a bit differently about returns on investments and cost-benefit analysis and all this other economic and mathematical ethics like utilitarianism wants you to think about. Another example. Another conversation starter. An old man rides into a small village with a cart behind him. The cart is boxed up and nobody can see inside it. He stops at the village square and a crowd gathers around him. He waves a gold staff above his head and begins to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "I have the offer of a lifetime for you. For absolutely no cost, I will drain away everybody's sadness and pain with my golden staff. Everybody in the village will be completely happy and content for the rest of their lives. All you have to do is mind my cart." Now, as I've read that part, some of you are probably thinking, whoa, hold on, what's the catch? right? We presume there's going to be some type of cost to this benefit. And is the cost worth the benefit, or will the cost outweigh the benefit? We need to figure out what the cost is going to be. He says, all you have to do is mind my cart, that's it. But notice, you go all the way back to Plato's common view, common understanding, we presume there's a catch. We presume there must be something else. This is too good to be true. And so again, part of this class is recognizing these phrases that people frequently use and placing that within the particular ethical theory, because by saying certain things, you may actually be making a larger claim than you think. Right? By saying things like, well, it is what it is, you're also saying, and I'm content with the way that it is. Otherwise, you set about changing it. It is what it is, and it really doesn't tell me much of anything. You've given me the descriptive, you haven't really given me the prescriptive, and by remaining silent, you're really prescribing, and it should continue in such a way, in such a manner. Frequently, it actually ties back to some type of cultural relativism. I'll let you guys think on that one and figure out why that's the case and why Shrapi says that. But all you have to do is mind my cart. One person asks, what's in the cart? It doesn't matter, says the man. Put the cart in your dungeon, your furthest field. I promise you on my life, nothing will ever come out of it, and nothing from it will ever affect you. You can completely ignore it for the rest of your lives. I don't care. The people in the square are very excited at this and go to get the mayor of the town. The old man repeats his offer to her. The mayor has a meeting with the town elders and they decide to accept the offer. Right? Because why wouldn't you? Right? This guy is saying, look, I can make everyone in the town happy. I can cost, benefit, and outright. I can benefit everyone. Greatest amount of happiness here. And utilitarianism agrees with virtue ethics. There's something special about this happiness thing. You would be crazy. You would be a crazy person. You would be insane to say, no happiness for us, thanks. The cost is not worth the benefit. Because he's already told you the cost is really nothing. The cost is just put the cart someplace. That's it. That's the cost. The end. And the benefit is you all get to be happy. This is an obvious vote. Of course they do it. Done, says the old man, and points his staff at them. Immediately the people can feel their worries, pain, and sadness draining away from them. They're all overjoyed, right? The mayor declares a public holiday. There's much eating and drinking among all the happy people. Boom, end of story, right? And you guys were so skeptical. You thought something bad was going to happen. Benefiting overall happiness. Right? The community's not sad anymore. And never will be again, says this fellow. You drain it all away. Boom, you're welcome. Just kidding. No, there's more. There's more of the story. Then one woman goes over to the cart and peeks inside. There's always somebody to ruin it. Somebody gonna ruin it. Now notice, this isn't on the old man. The old man didn't force anybody to go look. This was this lady's free will. She was just too curious. Let me go see what's in this thing. And this is interesting. Again, we hear people say all the time, ignorance is bliss, right? People claim that they would rather be the pig, but they wouldn't. If ignorance were bliss, Google would have failed. We are naturally curious things. We want to know things. This lady wants to know what's in this cart. I'm yelling. Wants to know what's in this cart, so she goes and takes a look. Now notice, this now breaches the contract. He said nothing from the cart will ever affect you. Once you look in the cart, that deal is done. This is now going to affect you. We can talk about things like observers out in the wild as they're observing lions and tigers and so on and so forth. Right? This observer effect, they're affected by the fact that they are being observed, and the person doing the observing is necessarily affected by the thing that they're observing. Right? We talk about things like journalistic distance, which Lester Holt a few years ago completely threw out the window by picking up the girl and carrying her across the border into safe refuge and so forth. He became the story rather than reporting the story. One woman goes over to the cart, peeks inside. She almost faints at what she sees. Inside's a poor, wretched, miserable girl, age about 10. She's filthy and starving and writhing in pain on the floor. Let me pause again. Shrapi wonders if this story would be a completely different story if instead of a 10-year-old girl, it were instead a 43-year-old man or a 90-year-old man. And this is still in keeping with utilitarianism. It may have ramifications for some of the other theories we talk about as well, such as care ethics or something along those lines. 10-year-old, we think, man, so much potential. 40-year-old, we think, still some potential, not as much potential as the 10-year-old. 90-year-old, potential gone. I don't know if you ever did this in high school or anything along those lines, or with your friends, because maybe your friends do weird things like my friends did. I'm just kidding, I didn't have friends. I did this on my own head and pretended I had friends. Where you have to do these like biome experiments. Where like the world is ending, you can only allow 10 people in. What 10 people are you allowing in? Notice you're saying these 10 people are more valuable to the continued existence / happiness of all of civilization than anyone else. And all these factors that you consider: age, profession, perhaps things like sexual orientation if we're worried about propagating the species or something along those lines, perhaps. Same with the organ donor thing, right? It's all of this weighing and balancing and ratios and greater than and less than, potential, the future, all of that. We don't know anything else about this 10-year-old girl. We don't know. She could have volunteered for this. She could have volunteered for all this pain and suffering to be heaped upon her. That's possible. Right? Now, if we're going to virtue ethics, we would wonder about if she understands the consequences of that action and that choice. Is she old enough to really understand? Or is this taking advantage of a 10-year-old girl? Is this exploiting her in some way? Perhaps she's a criminal. Perhaps this happens to be her punishment. We presume children to be innocent. We presume that, oh no, nothing that she could have done or committed should result in this type of punishment. I wonder if we would think differently and if our own biases would be revealed if I were to change other aspects besides just age, sex, race, nationality. If this might be a good test of each individual's own prejudices. What type of person, if I put in there, do you not feel as sorry for? What type of person do I put in there that you don't run to the mayor in horror? Just something to consider. Something to consider. Shrapi and his whack job ideas here. The woman runs over to the other villagers and they try to get the girl out of the cart, but they cannot. They turn and challenge the old man. "What is that girl doing in there?" the mayor shouts. "How could you do this to her?" Again, presuming that he's in power and exploiting this innocent 10-year-old girl. "I've done nothing wrong," says the old man. "When I drained all of your pain and sadness and misery away with my golden staff, I had to put it somewhere, so I simply put it all into the girl." "That's completely evil," says the mayor in horror. "It is not," said the man. "There's exactly the same amount of pain in the society as there was before. It's just now that it has a different place. I have not caused any more pain. I've only moved it from one place to another." Again, it depends upon the particular utilitarian that you're asking. Some will say the old man's right. He's not done anything wrong. Greater that one person suffer greatly than all people suffer. Others will say, no, he's got it reversed. Better that all people suffer a little bit than one person suffer greatly. And notice the consequences here. If you do the math wrong, you could more easily end up being unethical. It's about the consequences, not the intentions. You're going to be praised or blamed for something that you sort of have limited control over, maybe. Right? If I intend to hurt someone, but they don't actually get hurt, I'm ethically off the hook for consequentialism and utilitarianism. Or if I intend to hurt someone in the hurting of them, something else is revealed that then ends up saving their life. I'm the good guy. But the thing I did, look what it led to. How much emphasis do you want to place on results? And so here again, this is one of the points of contrast with utilitarianism and something like deontology. Intentions versus results. I forgot to put deontology on the thing. I've got a very interesting clip from Parks and Rec that emphasizes another point of contention between deontology and utilitarianism. And while on one hand, Sharapi still thinks that Sharapi is right, that utilitarianism does at least attempt to represent democracy. I wonder with regards to elected officials and representatives, what is it we're wanting them to represent? Are we wanting them to represent us and what we think will make us happy? Or do we think that they should represent our best interests, which may not be what makes us happy? We can go back to nihilism for that. We talk about deontology for that, the duty-based stuff. What is good for us may not be what we prefer, which is why, again, Mill says, hey, these mental pleasures, we prefer them, they're more desirable, and they're also more valuable. With regards to the capital punishment thing, he says, look, in reality, in actuality, death is not as bad as life stuck behind bars. But people think it's worse. So we should use that as a greater deterrent. We should probably make a huge spectacle out of it too, to really deter people from doing the thing. More interesting things to consider. See you next time.